Hey everyone, welcome to Professor Long's Lectures in Anatomy and Physiology. I'm Professor Bob Long. If you're watching these videos, you guys know that these videos are intended for use by students who are enrolled in my Human Anatomy and Physiology course at Del Mar College. The depth, the breadth, and the detail that your instructor might cover may vary. So these lectures truly are intended for my students following along in my class. If you find it helpful, by all means, use it if you're not in my class, but just know that your instructor may cover a different amount of detail. We're following along in my note set. We're going to start the blood lecture. We're on page 36 of the note set if you're one of my students. And we're going to start filling this information in. So now, there are three major details about blood that are listed at the top of page 36. You need to know the volume of blood for the average human being. The volume of blood for the average human being is about 5 liters. If you're a very small statured person, it can be a little less. A really large person can go all the way up to 6 liters or so, but somewhere usually around 5 liters of blood. You need to know the temperature of blood. Blood is slightly warmer than body temperature. Our body temperature is 98.6 degrees. The temperature of blood is 100.4. Don't put down 104. It's 100.4 degrees Fahrenheit. Slightly warmer than body temperature. One of those reasons is the chemical reactions in our body that are generating energy give off some heat. That heat gets absorbed very well by fluids, and one of the primary fluids is blood. So blood is always a little warmer than body temperature. You also need to know the pH of blood. The pH of our blood plasma is about 7.4. Okay? The actual range goes from about 7.35 to about 7.45. So it's slightly basic or alkaline. As you know, 7.0 would be neutral. Anything lower than 7 is acidic. And so if your pH, if your blood pH is less than 7.35, then what we say is, we call that acidosis. You'll hear about metabolic acidosis and respiratory acidosis later on, and we may talk about those. But in your career, you're going to hear about acidosis. If the pH of blood is greater than 7.45, then that is called alkalosis. Alkaline meaning basic, so if somebody's in respiratory alkalosis or metabolic alkalosis, that means that your blood pH is too high. Excuse me. So we're going to talk about how and why that happens when we do the respiratory and urinary system, but they are phenomenon that can mess with your physiology. Anyway, we'll go there eventually. Now, there are 5 major functions to blood that are at least listed in our textbook, and these can be done differently by different instructors in different textbooks, but I'm going to follow our textbook. One of the first major function is that blood can deliver oxygen, nutrients, and ions to tissues. Now, I'm going to use this abbreviation sometimes, IF. IF stands for interstitial fluid. And if you don't know, interstitial fluid is the fluid that flows between the cells in our tissues. So when I say tissues or interstitial fluid, I use those terms interchangeably. And it also removes carbon dioxide, waste, and excess ions. So if I have too much sodium or too much potassium in a tissue, they can dump it into the bloodstream and the blood will wash it away, deliver it to the kidneys or other systems, and we can get rid of the excess. So that's one of the number one functions of blood, is it's doing a lot of transportation. It's transporting oxygen and valuable nutrients and ions to our cells, and then as the cells utilize that stuff, essentially what's going to happen is this. Here's our cell with its nucleus. Our cells need to take in oxygen, they need to take in glucose, and they convert that into ATP inside the cell, and they spit out some carbon dioxide, okay? And along with that comes some waste molecules. Just like when we convert things like petroleum products into fuel for cars and for engines and for the plugs in our house, all that electricity and all the energy comes from, for the most part, a large part of it comes from refined products. So in the conversion of these petroleum products into fuel and energy, there's a lot of waste given off. And so same thing happens when we convert oxygen and glucose into fuel. We have a lot of waste, carbon dioxide and what we call metabolic waste. We can't have this stuff build up. Just like if you had a refinery dumping everything into the lake that the whole town lived around, eventually the town would get poisoned. Well, if we continue to dump stuff into the interstitial fluid, but we don't remove it, then the toxins build up in the fluid and it will poison our cells. What we call sepsis. We've talked about the word septic and sepsis before. We also need lots of sodium and potassium and chloride, calcium, and other ions. Our cells take them in. If they have excess, they dump out excess ions and other things. Okay. In the process of making energy, sometimes they dump out hydrogen ions, and it can lead to some acidosis and things. We'll talk about how and why in the future. So ultimately, this is what's happening. Our blood is going to deliver this stuff. Our cells will utilize what they need, and then all the waste gets dumped into the bloodstream. And our blood will wash it away. We have some filtration systems that clean it out. So that's one of the major functions of blood. Okay. By the way, well, we'll get to this in a little bit. A second major function of blood is that it's going to help maintain pH and ion concentrations of interstitial fluids out in the tissues. So this is almost, in my opinion, kind of the same thing, in that as we're removing carbon dioxide and excess ions, we're helping maintain the pH of other tissues, and we're maintaining the adequate ion concentrations in those tissues. The excess ions get washed away. The third major function of blood is immunity. This is our defense against infection and diseases. I wish we had time to go more into detail in this when we cover the white blood cells, but essentially that's what's happening. One of the things that we know, by the way, is that red blood cells, also called erythrocytes, play a major role in carrying oxygen and removing carbon dioxide. They carry most of the oxygen directly, we'll see later. They do indirectly carry the carbon dioxide. They help convert it to a more transportable form, and they carry some of it directly. We'll talk about that. It is the white blood cells. We abbreviate white blood cells as WBC, also called leukocytes, so we'll cover that in a little bit. They are our defense. They're our military and our police force, so to speak. If anything tries to enter the body, they recognize it and attack it and try to neutralize it and provide immunity. Okay. Another major function of blood is coagulation. Coagulation is blood clotting. Because red blood cells are delivering an overwhelming majority of the oxygen to our cells, and our cells have to have oxygen and glucose to make energy. If I cut off the oxygen supply, I have no energy. The cells die. They run out of gas, so to speak. Well, if we cut a blood vessel and we start losing red blood cells and losing blood volume and blood pressure, we're not delivering enough oxygen and nutrients to our tissues. Our blood has developed a series of enzyme reactions that will actually cause a coagulation or clotting of a broken vessel to stop blood loss. We also, another term for this, by the way, is hemostasis, which if you look at the name, hemo always refers to blood and stasis means to stay. So it means stay, blood. Don't go anywhere. Anyway, sorry. A last function of blood is that it helps maintain body temperature. And we talked a little bit about this. So I'm going to write this down, and then I'm going to erase the board so that I can go into a little bit more detail about setting the stage for a lot of what we're going to do. Okay? So hopefully you got all this information down. I'm going to erase this, And we'll talk about some of this in a little bit more detail. Now, pardon my back and give me a second to erase the board. Look, I don't know if you've realized this when you take anatomy and physiology or not, but you should realize this at some point, and since a lot of people don't, and no one ever told me, it dawned on me one day as a student, and I thought, wow, I wish someone had told me that. I'm going to give you some inside information, so to speak. Our cells, any cell in the human body for the most part, has its nucleus. The nucleus has the DNA that is the instructions for building all the proteins that perform all the functions of the cell, or an overwhelming majority. Now, I'm going to draw a really large one, but one of the organelles, they're really not bigger than the nucleus. They're tiny. They'd be like that big compared to the nucleus. But one of the organelles is a mitochondrion. And as you guys should be aware, our cells take oxygen plus glucose, they run them through mitochondria, and that produces a tremendous amount of energy, 36 molecules of ATP for 1 molecule of glucose. Now, our cells do have the ability to produce energy out of glucose without oxygen. They have the enzymes that they used to have when we were much simpler cells before they evolved. But without oxygen, we only get 2 ATP. Our cells, especially neurons and muscle cells, burn so much energy in a short time frame that they would burn up all the fuel before they got to the next stop. So if you live here in Texas, you know once you get west of San Antonio and you get past Junction, there's nothing for hundreds of miles. If you're only getting 2 miles to gallon in your car, you're going to run out of gas before you get to the next fueling station. So we would run out of gas, we would run out of energy before we get the next dose of glucose, before we could chase down something and eat it, or find some plants if we were stuck in the middle of nowhere. So the energy production of glucose without oxygen is only 2 ATP, not enough. Oxygen and glucose and the enzymes in mitochondria allow us to produce 36 molecules of ATP. So, now along with that, we said we're going to get some carbon dioxide plus some waste. We also get some water, and we'll talk about all those details at some point. But if you haven't realized this yet, and you're going to at some point, a lot of our physiology, the cardiovascular system, which we're about to do, or the respiratory system for the gases, the urinary system for removal of waste and other things, our digestive system for getting the glucose in. All of these systems are predicated upon delivering oxygen and glucose to our tissues, removing carbon dioxide and waste. That's how it works. That's the big deal. So this system that we're going to talk about and many other systems are all going to operate based on this. And this is going to drive how the systems adjust to continue oxygen delivery, carbon dioxide removal, glucose and nutrient delivery, and waste removal. So that's the big secret behind a lot of the systems that we're going to cover. Now, when it comes to blood, when we talk about blood, what we mean is whole blood. Whole meaning everything. Whole blood is made up of 2 major components. One part is called the formed elements, and the other part is called plasma. Now, this isn't exactly how to think of it, but this is the simplified way that my simple mind allows me to think of it. The plasma would be the fluid part. The formed element is the stuff floating in the plasma. And it's really mostly the cells. We'll talk about this in detail. But imagine if you had a bucket of pure water, nothing but water in it, and you dumped some sugar and some salt and some, other salts, sodium chloride, potassium chloride, some calcium, and you stirred it up. You would have interstitial fluid. You would have plasma, I should say. If I could bubble some oxygen in there and even put some carbon dioxide in it, I would have plasma. Now, if I took a bunch of stuff like, like some plastic-looking donuts or some plastic discs like hockey pucks and things and dumped them in there, and they were all floating at various levels, but they were floating in it, that would be the formed elements. So when I talk about stuff floating in the plasma, I'm not talking about the stuff dissolved into it like salts and sugar and oxygen and carbon dioxide. I'm talking about cells mostly, okay? So now the next part of the lecture that we're going to go into is going to talk about the components of plasma, and then we're going to go into detail of the formed elements, and then we're going to go into a little bit of control of blood. So I hope this was a basic intro for you guys. Actually, let me finish this up, and then we'll cut and go to the next video, okay? So when it comes to plasma, plasma has three major components, and we're going to go into details of this in the next video. Plasma is about 92% water. Approximately 92% water. It's almost entirely water. It's about 7% proteins. And I'm going to put a big asterisk next to this because this is an extremely high amount of protein compared to many other tissues of the body. Most interstitial fluids and many other tissues of the body do not have this much protein. 7% doesn't seem like a lot, but it's a lot compared to most other fluids of the body. So this is a big deal. And then it's about 1% other solutes. That includes things like glucose, ions, dissolved oxygen and carbon dioxide, plus other stuff, other nutrients and things, okay? So, our blood is mostly water, our plasma is mostly water, about 92%, about 7% protein, which is an extremely high number, and about 1% other solutes. When it comes to the formed elements, there's three major formed elements. And I'm just going to put major ones here because I don't want to write formed elements. One of the major formed elements is going to be erythrocytes, which we always abbreviate as RBC or RBCs. Erythrocytes are red blood cells. Erythro means red and cyte means cell. So these are the red cells in our blood, or red blood cells. There's another class called leukocytes. And by the way, leuko can be spelled with a K. Some books spell it L-E-U-K-O. That's the way I learned it. And new books now, we're Americanizing everything. They changed the K to a C, leukocytes. But a lot of this research was done by some German scientists, and they spell leuko with a K. Anyway, leukocytes are white blood cells. Now, one of the major functions of erythrocytes is that they're going to carry some of the dissolved gases. White blood cells, as we said earlier, are our immune system. The third structure is going to be these things called platelets. And it's important to note, these are not cells. They are cell fragments or pieces of cells. Now, I'm going to go into detail into each one of these in the next video. This is going to be a couple of videos, probably 2 or 3, maybe 4 to get all the information across. So please make sure that you get this information down and burned in your head. This is where some of the questions are going to come from. In the next video, I'm going to go into detail of the plasma, and then we'll go through the formed elements, we'll go through the clotting reaction, and we'll go through what's called tissue perfusion and recall of fluids, which is a really important concept for healthcare professionals. Anyway, I hope you learned something. I hope you had as much fun as I did. I'll see you in the next video. This one was kind of short. Well, I won't say short, but this one was kind of sweet and simple to set the stage for everything else we're going to do. Thanks for watching.